Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the One of Us podcast. Today we're going to be talking about an important topic, a relatable topic. We're going to be talking about church hurt and specifically how to navigate it, how it's real and present, and also how to heal from it. So I'm excited to talk about this because I think it's unique. I don't think a lot of people discuss it or maybe even realize that it's happening. But I'm sure we've all experienced some form of this because we live in a sinful and broken world where we're dealing with people. So I guess how would you guys define church hurt to start off?
Yeah, well, I like what you said kind of towards the end there, Crystal. Like, we're all sinners. No one's fully glorified this side of heaven. So, if we're all imperfect, obviously there's going to be a level of letdown in the church. But to answer your question, Crystal, I think church hurt ultimately is when someone from the church specifically, like maybe a pastor or someone who runs church, kind of lets you down, or someone who you think represents did something that was really wrong and they wronged you in a way that is really painful.
What are some examples of ways in which people can experience what we're talking about, church hurt?
Well, I think there's a lot of different examples. I think before we get to the more traumatic, serious ones, I think we should just kind of focus on more so things that happen occasionally. I'll say this. What do you guys think about people who feel hurt at church when they've been attending, let's say, a month or so, and no one really pays attention or tries to pour into their life, and they have that level of hurt because they're kind of being either feeling the perception of being ignored or that they aren't being really poured into by that church?
I was gonna say like a different example, but that's along those lines.
You can go ahead and
That
say it too if you want to, and then we can still
so
talk about it.
I know you didn't want to do deep stuff. This one I don't think is super deep, but I feel like something that I've experienced a lot in LA is like you can go to a church for like months or even years, and if you like just stop showing up, people just don't care enough to say anything.
I see, I see. I think that is kind of interesting. Like maybe there isn't enough of, I guess, investment from a lot of people. I would say that's a American cultural thing though, because I think we live in this culture where, people want to respect your right to decision. So if you decide not to attend church, I think there's a level of pressure from society to let people make those decisions. I do think you're right that maybe church leadership should have more of an investment, and I think that's why connect cards and filling out kind of prayer requests from your local church is important, because some churches kind of utilize that to kind of follow up on what's happening in your life.
I guess my perspective on that is like you don't have to go to the same church to still be like a brother or sister in Christ. You know what I mean? To check up on people. Because I feel like the people that stop attending are probably the ones that need the most outreach. You can still respect their decision of not returning, but still be actively seeing if they're okay.
And I think too, the desire to be seen and heard and to be validated and sought after in a space comes from a good place. You want to join a community and a group where there's a reciprocal relationship. And so I'd say if you're someone who is maybe not experiencing that themselves, but is trying to support someone who is, I think it's important to not minimize someone's experience. All of our experiences is unique. All of our church relationships, our personalities, how we mesh with other people. There is, steps that we can always take to try to be, a part of the body, try to engage, be the friend we want to see sort of thing. But it does happen. People sometimes feel left out, and I think that can be a real experience. Or another thing is sometimes people can be hurt by some form of, gossip. I haven't experienced that directly, but I know a lot of people have as well.
Yeah. Well, I'll say about before we kind of change into gossip a little bit, I really like what our local church does is that they're really kingdom like minded. So if you're attending our church and you don't feel at home, they'll actually help you to connect with other churches. And I think Jesus's church is multifunctional. There's many different churches that are spreading the good news. And I think that if your local church isn't doing it for you, you don't have to feel like that's the only church that's out there. That, and I feel like also if you tell the church your grievances, I mean, that might be helpful for them too, because they might not be aware of what's happening. But I do think, Crystal, like shifting onto what you're saying about gossiping, I think that kind of goes into like the more malicious intent of people. So, do you guys have any examples of like anything you've heard of or any church hurt?
Vic, this might be a good time for you to share. The whole like gossipy kind of thing with the church. Yeah, you can go ahead.
Okay, well, now that, thanks for reminding me. I was like, what are you talking about? I was like, that's never happened to me. Plot twist. So, I actually have an example with the gossiping within the church. So, this was many, many years ago. This was when I was just getting back into my faith. I wasn't even a year into my faith. And I was going to this church, and I was actually going to this church with Tati. Tati's the one that introduced me because it was a church on campus because Tati and I didn't have a car, so we couldn't really, check out many places, but there was this one available, and it was filled with the people inside, and the friends that we made were really good. But unfortunately, while I was at this church, there was a guy and he was in our friend group, and he admitted that he had feelings for me, and at that time I was very honest where I was like, "Hey, I'm going to let you know I'm just starting out in my faith, and I have a lot of things that would cause this relationship, if we were to pursue it, to fail miserably." So I was like, I will be honest, I am in no shape to be in any type of intimate relationship. I was like, I just really want to focus on the Lord. And at first he took it well, but then as the day and the days and the week went on, he ended up not taking it well. So what did he do? He went and talked to the pastor, which I have no issue. If you need to go and talk to your pastor or a mentor, go for it. Talk to someone that you feel comfortable and confident in being able to confide in. But it didn't stop there. So after he had talked to the pastor decided to gather all the people in the church that were serving in the church. And at that time, it was only 20 people, maybe 30 people max.
Wait, how many people were in this round table?
I think he pretty much had probably like half of the people. So half of the people that attended the church, he had in like some type of leadership position. And he had a meeting with them about it and told them what happened. And I had no idea until someone came to me that I didn't really know and was like, "Hey, I heard this happen. Like, what went down?" And I was like, "How did you find out about it?" And he goes, "Oh, the pastor had a meeting with all of us about it and we discussed it." And I was like, "How many people were at this meeting?" And he goes, "Oh, about like 10 to 12." And I was like, "Oh, well, that's not okay." And at that time, it was very hurtful because no one was asking me about my side. And the way that the guy kind of made it seem was though like I was like, no, and all this stuff, and just didn't really portray it and didn't really portray me in like the best light. And so at that time, it was really frustrating. And I ended up actually being able to find someone who went to another church, and I made that transition. And honestly, even when I left that church, I actually reached out to the pastors and I had shared with them, "Hey, thank you guys so much for opening up your church and opening up your home. But I feel like God is moving me elsewhere. But thank you for the time and thank you for the growth that you allowed me to have in my relationship with Jesus. But I will no longer be attending your church." And left and made my way. I wanted to end things on the best way possible because at the moment I was kind of frustrated, like, why would this happen? And I was angry at the guy and all this stuff. And so I think if it had been a couple months prior, I probably would have just given up on the faith thing. But I knew they weren't the representation of Jesus. They were supposed to be in the image of God, but I didn't want their actions to push me away from God because I'm like, you know what? They've got their own things, but I know that this is not who God is. And so I just continued to pursue in my faith and my relationship and going to church and everything. But that was probably a really hard time. But honestly, that was, like I said, years ago, and I had completely forgotten about that. And I have no hard feelings. And look, at the end of the day, I could probably say like some negative things about the church and how it's not a good church, but you know what? It really did help me in the time that I needed it. And I was able to actually really meet some amazing people who I became really good friends with and I'm still friends with to this day. And so at the end of the day, it was not a loss. And I just came to learn like the church is really filled with broken people, and sometimes you get to see like an ugly side. But it's as Jesus said, he's not here for the healthy, he's here for the sick. And like another analogy people use is like when you go to a hospital, you're not going to a hospital to meet other healthy people. It's filled with sick people and trying to get better. And that's how it is for the church as well. And so that's kind of like my encouragement is if you've faced church hurt, you just have to understand it doesn't justify anyone's actions, but The church is filled with people who are completely broken and completely lost, and the Lord has found them and brought them to this place to work on them and work on their hearts, and that takes time. And so be patient with the people around you and just continue to pursue your relationship with Jesus and don't let it deter you from saying goodbye.
And to kind of piggyback off of your hospital analogy, it's like sometimes and very few times apart, right? But that pastor from that church, not to hate on anybody, but I felt like he gave this sense that like he was the only pastor on earth, right? And kind of to use your hospital analogy, it's like there's millions of doctors around the world. You don't have to settle for the one that you feel like is giving you poor care. And ultimately, Jesus is the ultimate doctor.
That's what I was going to kind of touch on, what you said about, if it had happened a couple months prior, you would have maybe left the faith. But in this situation, you realize these people aren't God. You know what I mean? Yeah, we are to represent like the Lord, but we're still in the body of flesh. And I think that's really important because I think a lot of people who experience hurt, whether that's, on the spectrum of hurt, right? It's a large spectrum of how that can come about. But regardless, people, when they experience hurt, sometimes leave the faith or like leave their relationship with Jesus completely over the actions of human beings. And I think that's so sad and so dangerous because as Christians, we're not God. Like I said, we are like imitators of him and like Christians, he lives in and through us, but we're sinful. And Jesus and God aren't responsible for our sins and our free will of just bad choices against other people. So I think that's just important for anyone listening. I know it can be easy to kind of put everyone in the same basket of like, I had this one experience, everyone related to Christianity gone, X'd out, canceled, but that's really not the Lord and not God's heart either. And it's sad.
Well, I'm glad you have a great church now, Vic, and that you've rised above it.
Yeah, the people that go there are a little questionable though.
No shame, no shame, no
For
shame.
those
Hey,
of you,
that's a complete joke because I go to the same church as Juan and Crystal. So for those of you listening, it's actually a phenomenal church.
Well, I kind of wanted to talk about a little bit about how we handle church hurt, kind of going more into that arena. So I think we really need to kind of sit in Matthew 18:15, which is kind of where Jesus talks about in Matthew how you handle transgressions from a brother. Because I actually think a lot of Christians don't follow this, and this is why gossip kind of brews. So in this passage, starting in 18:15, I'm just going to paraphrase for the sake of time. Basically, Jesus kind of gives a timeline of how you handle when people kind of let you down or they are sinning. And I want to make that distinction. It's if someone's sinning against you, like they're actually doing something wrong. If they're doing something you don't like, but it's not wrong, then there's a problem with you, not with the other person. But in this instant, let's just talk about that gossiping situation, right? The first step that Jesus says is you need to actually talk to that person one on one. And I think this step being missed is what leads to a ton of gossip. So I can't tell you how many conversations I've had with so many believers where they're upset with someone because they said something, they did something, they didn't do something. And I'm like, oh my gosh, like, did you let them know? And they're like, no, I haven't said anything. So right there, you kind of just admitted that you didn't even follow kind of what Jesus built to handle this. And I feel like a lot of times I've had situations where I've spoken to people who I felt wronged me because I think a lot of times it's like a lack of knowledge. If you don't know what's happening and you are led to assume, sometimes this flesh makes you assume the worst because of how we see the world. So a lot of times if you just ask your brother and sister like, "Hey, did you mean this? Hey, what do you mean by this?" and you let them explain themselves, I guarantee you 9 times out of 10 they're going to say something that you just didn't see. And also we're all different. Like, we'll have different cultures and backgrounds, we're different sexes, so a lot of times we see the world in a different lens that we need to like kind of express to each other.
I think it's a good first step. I feel like we've had many encounters ourselves where like there's been issues, and when we bring it up to the person, a lot of the time they don't even know what they did wrong. So it's like a good way to just kind of clear the air and get another perspective. Not saying that it's excusing their actions, but I think it's a good way to just like build on the relationship and to just like move forward and to be like, okay, well, now I know that this person reacts this way with XYZ and vice versa.
Yeah, and then to move on, so the second step that Jesus says, let's say you talk to the person, they don't really explain themselves well, or what Tati's saying, like maybe their explanation doesn't really excuse what they did. And I think the important thing is they keep repeating that same transgression. The second step is to now kind of like have an intervention. So in the Bible, it says to bring 2 to 3 witnesses to kind of talk about the action of the person. I know it says witnesses, but I would argue not just anybody like who's witnessed this happening, but somebody who maybe has a lot of influence over that person's life, and you just have a genuine conversation, because at that point you are sharing with your closest friends like, hey, this is where you're missing the mark. And it's not to judge or condemn anybody, like we're all saved through Christ. I just think sometimes in this walk, we say this all the time, we're meant to walk together because this flesh is so weak and we are susceptible to falling short on to other people, on ourselves, on the people we love, on the people we hate. And the only way we can avoid those situations is to always be in such strong community in the body of Christ. So, what I would argue is for anyone receiving that second step is listen to your body, right? Listen to the people, because these are the people that God placed in your life that are trying to love you and steer you to Christ. And the people who are speaking in this intervention to the person doing the transgression, just remember that ultimately, as Paul says, do everything in love. And the accountability is meant to build the person up, not to tear them down.
I was going to say, obviously, this is like biblical wisdom. So all of these points are important and the order of them are important too. Because imagine you do an intervention, but you never spoke to the person. And now you have like 5 people involved in this thing when it could have just been resolved in like a conversation with them. So doing these in order, I think, is important, and not giving up on the person. Because I think sometimes people may have an initial conversation with someone and it didn't go the way they wanted it to go. And so they just give up on the person. Also, I could make the disclaimer, like, obviously this can be about any like disagreement or issue, but I think we all can kind of have discernment in which issues require all of these steps and which can be like, okay, they forgot to tell me about the party was at 9:15 instead of 9. This is not an intervention. It's more like sin issues and patterns in that area. But I do think it's important because accountability is for us, right? Not against us. So I think I've seen this take place a few times, whether I was a part of them or not. And I think there's so much healing that can come from it. And it may not be what I want to hear if I'm the person being intervened with, or what they want to hear as the person I'm involved in intervening with. But when you do it all with love and you've taken the time to like pray and take it to the Lord, and you did take that step of talking to them first, I think it's important, and having different voices in there that can speak to that as well.
I have a great question because I'm reflecting on like some of our experiences. Do you think when you do an intervention that you should give the person a heads up?
I think it depends on the person. I'm not a fan of this. I don't think you should set someone up for a trap. And what I mean by this is like you invite someone over to your house. Let's say you invite someone like, "Hey, let's have coffee at my house." And they show up and there's like 10 people there, or there's like 5 people there. I think that's not what Jesus is modeling. I think rather it's kind of you're with a group of people and then you all have a concern, and while you gather you're like, hey, we want to meet up with you to talk about this, and that kind of goes from there.
I think sometimes it can happen organically too. Like, I can't think of times, maybe like once or twice, where it was like established, but other times it kind of happens naturally just in conversation, and then it ends up being like a moment of encouragement, rebuke, or reproach. I can see how it could get tricky, but yeah, what are your thoughts, Vic?
I say completely catch them off guard. I'm joking. Absolutely
That's
not.
right.
No, I think you should definitely give them a heads up. And especially I think it also depends on the person. Cause like I know for me, if I were to walk into a room and everyone's just sitting there ready to have like a big discussion with me, it would freak me out. I wouldn't be able to think clearly. Rather, if they're like, hey, like we have something, we'd really like to talk to you about it and just ask more questions, I'd be like, okay, I can mentally prepare. Rather, I don't feel like I'm being blindsided. So I think it definitely, I would say the best approach would to let the person know and give them a heads up.
I can see though how sometimes it doesn't work out that way though. You know
It
what I
depends
mean?
on the person. You
Yeah,
need
it
to know your
depends on the
people.
person. Like, you obviously have a relationship with them, which is why you're bringing this up in the first place. You're not going to do this with just some random Joe on the street. Like, you're going to
Well, that's
do
that's why
this
I was
with
saying
the
you need to
agreement.
have people who have high influence in their life.
Oh, yeah,
Like
yeah,
let's say
100%.
it's like you and your friend, right? And you're like, wow, they're like I don't know, they're getting blacked out drunk every night. And then you're not going to invite like two people from church that know nothing about their lives, and you expect them to speak about this person's life when they know nothing about them. That's kind of like weird, and it could also lead to a lot of condescending like situations. That's why I feel like you need to bring in people who have a higher influence, higher connection with that person.
Yeah, I guess it depends on the person because there's some people that might not care about being caught off guard. Some people might care about being caught off guard, and then there's some that might run away from it. So,
And
Well,
it
it doesn't always have to be like negative. I think sometimes that's what we think, right? It's like, because I think there's a sense of desperation, like, oh my gosh, this person's like falling into the grasp of the devil or something. But genuinely, it could just be like, hey, let's go catch up over a cup of coffee with like Joe and Schmo. And why don't we talk about, what God's doing in our life? And let's just air out some grievances.
I think too, for the people maybe that have had this experience before, been the person in the hot seat per se, the people talking to you, this isn't their favorite pastime. You know what I mean? Like, it takes a lot of energy and effort and thought and love and care to be like, I'm going to take the time out of my day and really like process this, pray through this, and have this conversation. Cause that's not like rainbows and butterflies either. Like it takes a lot to take that step. And so I think it needs to be like mutual grace, like grace for the person, that you're going to talk to and maybe address things with. And obviously, with a spirit of love, being kind hearted and tender hearted and forgiving one another, like the Lord calls us to. But also on the reverse side, like having grace for the people talking to you because they genuinely care. Like, if they didn't, who cares? We live in a culture where it's like, you do you. I don't care. I'm going to focus on me. Very selfish. But in the Christian, culture, to go out of your way to do that is a showcase of love. So I
yeah.
think that's important too.
You know what, Crystal? That's kind of what I was trying to reference earlier with the whole church thing. Like, you should go to church and find a community that does care about you in and outside of the church. It shouldn't just be like a Sunday fellowship or young adult twice a month.
Yeah, so and then there's a final step that Jesus gives. So if this person, and I want to make a distinction, right? Cuz I think we've said this before, if someone has like a different perspective, or let's say whatever they're doing, they recognize it's a struggle and they're doing everything they possibly can to defeat the sin in their life, but we're all human. It just happens, but they're asking for help. They're getting the accountability. They're doing the right steps, right? I don't think this next step involves those people. I think this step involves the people who are actively sinning and they don't see what's wrong with it. Like, they're just kind of like, I know what I'm doing is wrong. I'm just going to keep doing it. And that's the final step where Jesus says, now you need to bring in the whole church. Now, I don't think this is saying put that person on blast. Like, don't go up on your Sunday service and be like, "Hey, so and so is a drunk, and you can't hang out with them because they're a drunk and they get drunk every Friday. Don't invite them over." But I think what it's saying is you need to have now a more sophisticated intervention with the church. And I think if you're not involved in like ministry, that involves maybe having an intervention with your pastor and maybe with the pastor's wife and like people in church who are willing to invest in that person. I think that's what that last step is. And, Jesus does have some frank words, very, very harsh. Say, like, if that person, even to that point, refuses all that help and all that kind of reproach, then you just kind of have to let them go off in the wind. And I know we've been saying like you shouldn't give up on anybody, but I think in those situations, I learned this saying kind of through some lady in young adults. I forgot her name, but she said sometimes some people, not that they're far gone, but their problem is like so big that it's a God problem, right? Like, it's not up to me to fix, it's up to God to do something about.
And that's why that's order is important, because going back to just referencing Victoria's story with the whole church gathering, that's not what we're talking about. There was no order of conversations or anything in that. But I think what you said is like real. Like, that's a tough idea to like think about, even for me, that I'm someone that is very much like, I don't know, that idea of being like, okay, bye. I've wrestled with that with different people in my life where I've been like, okay, like, this is
Well, I would argue,
persistent.
Crystal, I would argue that most people who fall in that category, they're not really wanting to stay in your life. Because
Exactly.
we've had friends who've reached that point, like that very last step, and they've ghosted us. Like they've not hung out with us rather than reverse.
Yeah, and sometimes people really change through that experience and through that distance, realizing, okay, like shoot, like I had something good like with the Lord, with this community, with these people that loved me, and I, chose to separate myself or chose to leave. Like that may be what the Lord is referring to in this. So it's just like, your intervention isn't doing anything, like what Juan said. Like it's time that I sort of take over in their life, whether that's like sometimes people reach a super low point and realize, shoot, like what have I done with my life, and I need God.
Prodigal son moment.
Yeah, like that's the moment here, is sometimes you just need to really realize like I desperately need God, and then you return back to the Lord. And then us people, referencing the prodigal son counterculture episode that we did, we need to be people of love, and welcome those people back with open arms, and always loving them, and praying for them. But sometimes people are on that journey, right? I had a question on, what about if you're someone supporting someone who's experienced this and you're listening, and maybe it's not a direct experience you have yourself, but someone who's going through this?
Well, I'm just going to go super far end because I've actually had this conversation like a week or so ago, but basically someone told me, or I saw a video of someone saying like, "Hey, I was abused in the church by the pastor, or I've been like sexually assaulted, or I've been like physically hurt by people, and what do I do?" And I think that obviously Matthew 18:15 is a right court of action, but I don't want to, I guess, diminish like the severity of things. Like of course there's always love and forgiveness that occurs and gentleness, but when someone does something that is to that level of extremity where, we're ultimately saved from the ultimate consequence of sin, right? Death, but that doesn't mean sin doesn't carry consequence. If I was supporting someone who's gone through that extreme, I would always encourage them not only to have those conversations with those people, but to also talk to the right parties to get involved for that hurt. And then,
You're referring to like counselors,
yeah, like
therapies,
counselors,
things like
therapy. I mean, even the authorities, right? Like if someone abused you to that extent and it's against the law, like some people say that's an extreme thing to do, to charge the pastor with something heinous. But if like that person did something heinous, I would argue, and I would say the biggest thing is to pray over that person and let them know that you're building them up, like that you're supporting them, that you're praying over them. That, and I think something that one of our friends Hope said that really works is a lot of times in that position we like to tell people, hey, let me know if you need something, which I think 99% of the time the people genuinely mean it and they're being nice, but that puts the ball on someone who's vulnerable and doesn't know's court. I think people in that position, what they really like is people who take initiative, right? Like people are like, "Hey, I'm gonna come over and clean your house for you," or "Hey, I'm gonna make you like a meal or two so you don't have to worry about food," or "Hey, I'm going to be praying over you. Call me at night so we can pray together."
But it is unfortunate that things like this happen just in the church. And forgiveness and reconciliation doesn't always look the same in every situation. I think this is also just maybe a pep talk to the believers listening. Like, we do, although we are not Jesus and we are not the Lord, a lot of time to unbelievers or people new in their faith, we represent the faith, right? We represent the Lord wherever we go. And so to just be mindful of that and to not be a stumbling block for other people, and to really just love people really well and ask for forgiveness when you need to ask for forgiveness, and just be mindful about what you're doing and what you're saying and how you're treating people, because it matters and it can lead other people astray. Like, I've had plenty of conversations with people about faith, and one of the first things they say is like, all those, like what Juan was saying, all those pastors or priests or whatever are all whack. They're all doing a bunch of like nasty things, and everyone here is gossips and yada yada. Like, it's unfortunate. Yeah, we're human. That happens in all spaces, regardless of where you go. But we're held to a higher standard because of our faith. And I think that could be a good thing, right? Because we are to be sanctified and justified and edified, but it gives you an extra responsibility. Being a Christian is an extra sense of responsibility in the greatest way.
I will say, I mean, I know that it's more scripture, and Vic briefly mentioned it in her experience. If you do plan to leave a church, I do think it is important to talk to a pastor and like tell them why, because a lot of the times like they aren't really aware of the issues that are going on, and it's really good feedback for them to help improve. I think one thing that I've learned, because I have done this, is if you want change, like you have to let them know, and most of the time like they don't know what's going on. So
Yeah, but anyways, that kind of wraps up our conversation on church hurt and healing. There the truth is we're all imperfect and we're all going to let each other down, but the beautiful thing is that Jesus is perfect and God always has healing at the other side. If you're ever struggling or feeling let down by anyone, always let us know. We love to hear out. We're always an open ear and we're always praying for you guys and each other. But before we close, we're gonna obviously go to our favorite topic, hot take time with Tati.
professional athletes should not be paid more than doctors and teachers.
Amen.
Okay, I have hot
Dang, that's
takes on
pretty hot
this,
take.
and I've had debates with people about this. Shout out to Hope if you're listening. Our friend works in athletics. She's a coach for a football team. And personal opinion, they get paid way too much. I understand that they bring in revenue. Juan, I'm sure, is going to touch on this, from entertainment and watching it on TV and yada yada, and they produce a lot. But I think we just got our priorities a little out of whack. I think a percentage of earnings can go to a lot of other things, and whether you have 10 million or 11 million literally it's not going to impact you. That's my hot take.
I see what you guys are saying. My problem is this: like, ethically, it makes sense that people who are saving lives should be getting paid like the right amount, which I would argue that they are to an extent. Now the question is, why are some people in maybe athletics, right? If you boil it down to its absolute core, they're just playing like a children's playground game and getting paid like millions of dollars for it. But the truth, I think this is the problem that I have, is that with like, oh, they shouldn't be paid more with it, is that they're kind of like an entertainment, right? So they're putting up a show and they get paid basically what people are willing to pay to watch. So no one's like putting a gun towards everyone's face saying like, you better watch football. And it's not a necessity. So they make their money, their payout is based off all the supporters and fans that they have who are paying into this like system. So for someone to be like, they shouldn't get paid that much is kind of weird, because it's like if you made a business and you're selling a successful product, right? Like you made like a can of soda and everyone loves your soda, and someone's like, "Oh, you shouldn't be like making that much money because you're just like putting soda in a can."
Okay, but let's be real here. People in their garage making a soda are not making. Juan, just spit out some numbers of some of the people about how much they make.
Anything on the top of my head, but I do know that they probably make more
What,
than what we
500
make.
million?
No, that's like way too much. They make like maybe like 50 million over 5 years, but in their sleep, like I always joke about this with Crystals, like some of the top athletes while they're sleeping, they make more than we all make like in a year. So it's just kind of funny because it's like, oh wow, like we all went to bed and like so and so just
Oh,
woke
they
up this
probably make
morning.
more than what I make in 10 years in their one night's rest.
They probably make more in 1 year than I will in my lifetime.
Yeah, in our lifetime.
Okay, anyways,
actually.
but I do see when people are like, maybe there should be a tax or like
That's what I was thinking.
there should be a proceed. But I mean, if you tax or proceed anything like that, it always falls to the fans. So it always falls to the people who are supporting that. So it only just make that level of entertainment more expensive. So I don't
I
see
will
it.
say working in entertainment, It's more than just the fans. There's brand deals, there's sponsors, there's like a
Yeah, well,
lot of
okay,
different.
like to throw it back at you, Tati, because I know you said sports, but what do you think about singers? Like, do you think people who are singers should be making more than teachers and doctors?
So singers actually get screwed. I learned, I was at a panel thing yesterday and I learned that singers actually get screwed the most because when you think about the record label like system, they basically are like, oh, like we'll lend, I will give you an advance right now, right? It'll be like $100,000, which I know it sounds like a lot, but it really isn't for especially the projects. And you basically owe them all that money back. It's a bank, so you're investing all of this money to just get like quarters and pennies in
Well,
return.
I would say that too.
If you really want to look into it, I recommend you like watch John Bellion because he has been like actively screwed by the labels just like everyone else. And I definitely recommend watching like the way that he explains it.
I'm not a fan of like sports people shouldn't get paid at what they do. I feel like it should just be like maybe our teachers and our nurses and our doctors aren't getting paid enough. Maybe that's the problem, not that someone else is getting paid more.
Vic, you haven't spoken.
As a
Yeah, Vic,
teacher,
you're the teacher here.
as a teacher, I think we 100% deserve to get paid more than what we actually do. And it's not for anything except we are with a lot of people's children more than they're actually with their own children. And during the days, we're not just teaching them academics, like we're teaching them behaviors, we're teaching them how to emotionally take care of themselves. We're dealing with their emotions. There's a lot that we go through and that we take care of in a single day. And all of teachers are understaffed. And that's why there's probably like such a high turnover rate for teachers. I think if teachers got paid more and compensated, that there would probably be teachers that would actually stay in the profession longer and would be more inclined to kind of to stay with it. But oftentimes they kind of get taken advantage of. They're kind of left to fend for themselves even though they're supposed to have this amazing support and they get paid little for it. So, sorry, but singers and NFL players should not be getting paid more than like nurses.
That's our hot take. I'm curious what you guys think.
Not my hot take. Maybe they should
Okay.
be an NFL league for teachers and nurses. Like then we'll make more money.
No one is gonna watch that.
Nintendo is the best gaming console.
Yeah.
I don't know. Maybe for girls.
What?
I
Okay,
think it is because
honest.
everyone can play Nintendo. It's safe for all ages. It's interactive and it's not killing people.
Juan, you telling me right now that you wouldn't go and play a thing of Mario Kart?
This is one of the rare moments where Vic's 3-point presentation actually made sense. Because what I was gonna say was that if you think about performance and like what gives you the best immersive experience, it's gonna be like a computer, and nothing beats that. But I think Vic's going to relatability and playability, which I do think Nintendo has, because they're just more of like the PGG like audience.
I don't know anything about video games, but I've played Mario Party a couple times.
Among Us.
So I'll have to agree
During
with the
COVID.
statement. And the remotes are or the controllers are a lot cuter than like a PlayStation or Xbox. So
And you can take it anywhere.
so this is where my opinion is coming from. Purely aesthetic. I like that
I
they
have a
have yellow
PS5.
controllers.
Crystal, you can buy stickers and like make any controller, any color.
Yeah, Crystal.
You
This
can
is
even do
why
it.
I said Nintendo was the best because Crystal hates video games, but Nintendo is one of the games that Crystal will play.
It's one of the exceptions.
It is. She likes Mario Party and we have fun playing it. So there you go. All right, everyone, that is the end of our episode. We are praying for you guys. We are praying that you had a wonderful week, that you had a wonderful Easter with all of your families and got to enjoy some service, some good food, and just ultimately praising the Lord and for the sacrifice that he made. And, you know, I saw this thing. It's not nails that held him up on the cross, but it was love. And as Christ loved us, that we should love other people, whether we've been hurt by them or maybe they're a little bit difficult. At the end of the day, the Lord died for them because he loved them. So, you know, find some forgiveness, find someone to talk to and work through that process with. But have an amazing week, guys, and we'll see you next time. Bye.